And joining us on the Jewish Forum this week is Zvika Klein, the Jewish World Analyst for the Jerusalem Post in our Tel Aviv studio. We have Michal Kotler-Wunsch, a former member of the Israeli Parliament of the Blue and White Party and a public policy and strategy advisor, joining us from Ra'anana. And Halie Soifer, CEO of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, joining us from Washington, D.C. Halie, we'll start with you. Is the Biden plan up to the task of combating anti-Semitism?
Well, thanks for the question, Caleb. And yes, I would say that this strategy is far more than sufficient. It's extraordinary, in fact. It's an extraordinary demonstration of the administration's deep commitment to combating this form of hate and this scourge of hate that has targeted the Jewish community. This is an unprecedented whole-of-government approach that contains over 100 action items to raise awareness of anti-Semitism and directly combat it. So it's not just sufficient. This is unprecedented. It's far-reaching, it's effective, and it's incredibly important, which is why it has been embraced and celebrated by the vast majority of Jewish Americans.
Right. Michal, Halie says more than sufficient, but Michal, some critics have said in some areas it falls a little short.
Well, I just want to raise the very sort of, you touched upon it, Kalev, the issue of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, the result of nearly 20 years of a democratic process with the intent to comprehensively identify so that we can combat anti-Semitism. And of course, without being able to define something, we don't know what it is that we're identifying or combating. And so we have a situation in which the scourge of anti-Semitism, which we've seen rise to a 30-year high, and that is absolutely a reason to congratulate the seriousness with which the White House recognized this threat, the scourge of anti-Semitism, the imperative to understand that if we only identify partially or some of the manifestations of this old, new, ever mutating toxic hate, then we will be remiss in the ability to combat it. And if I had to give just two examples from the last week, well, the CUNY commencement address and the Roger Waters hate fest would not necessarily be caught by this strategy, because then again, anti-Zionism, according to the Nexus definition, is not anti-Semitism.
Zvika, there is this discussion, and there are some who say there were some political considerations in the Biden approach here, over concern perhaps for the more progressive wing of his own Democratic Party.
Right, 100%. I mean, I think, first of all, I agree with both of, the people both of my colleagues who are speaking here. On the one hand, it's an amazing, plan, an amazing strategy, 60-page strategy, with so much being influenced into putting into to have every single government ministry actually say how they're going to combat anti-Semitism. But on the other hand, the fact that the majority of the mainstream Jewish organizations in North America urging the administration to accept the IRA definition that has been accepted by tens of countries around the world, many of whom are not like the most, pro-Israel, by definition, but have acknowledged the fact that anti-Zionism is a sense of anti-Semitism. So, as you said, Kalev, pretty much, there's the progressive side of the Democratic Party who is pushing for actually a more extreme to the left type of definition, the Jerusalem definition, which is a lot more left-wing than the Nexus document, that hasn't, been accepted. So many of the people were saying, okay, they didn't, accept the extreme left one, we're okay with this. But there is a sense of a problem if the White House will not say this is our only definition for anti-Semitism.
All right. Well, Halie, how do you respond to the criticism that in not embracing but not fully adopting the IRA definition, there was some political considerations involved in the Biden White House in order not to say antagonize some progressive wings of the Democratic Party?
I think we're missing the forest for the trees here. I mean, the reality is that this document reiterates the fact that the Biden administration has embraced the IRA definition. It also acknowledges that there are several definitions, and all of them serve as valuable tools to raise awareness and combat anti-Semitism. So I'm glad that it was identified as a 60-page document. What we're talking about right now in terms of the definition is approximately half a page. But look at the other 59 and a half pages of this document that include over 100 actions this administration has committed to take to combat anti-Semitism. It's incredibly important. And again, that is why the vast majority of Jewish Americans and Jewish organizations have embraced this strategy and are grateful to the administration for putting it forward.
All right, Michal, you could answer some of Halie's points. I should note there has been some criticism of the process, the inclusion of the American Islamic Organization, CAIR, which has been harshly critical of Israel. And also, some say it groups anti-Semitism with other, it sort of dilutes it by grouping it with other either biases or prejudices. So I'll give you a chance to respond.
Well, absolutely. So, Caleb, first of all, you raised the issue of the organizations that were consulted, and absolutely, CARE is a virulently anti-Semitic, even terror-supporting organization. So the fact that they would have anything actually to offer, any contribution to make on the issue of identifying and combating anti-Semitism is a clear sort of statement and attempt to appease what Zvika actually touched upon, which is identifying and combating anti-Semitism. It should not be politicized. This is not about a right or a left, a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or a conservative, a scourge of threat to, I would say, foundational principles of America, of all democracies. And so the moment that it lends itself in any way to a political differentiation in the way that we identify it, well, then we are partially identifying and combating. And if I can offer anecdotally, having come back from a law school speaking tour, the topic of my talk was anti-Semitism. The response to my talk was virulent anti-Zionism. So the understanding that an old, new, ever mutating hate that at once targeted the individual Jew, barring the individual Jew from an equal place in society, has mutated and has become and has turned into what bars the Jewish nation state from an equal place among the nations, what Natan Sharansky coined as the 3 Ds, the demonization, the delegitimization, and the double standard, which are an inherent part of the IRA working definition, are the single and only gold standard of being able to identify and combat this virulent hate.
Right, and Zvika, I mean, I think it's an indication we're talking here more about just a couple of sentences in this report, but the question of whether the issue of combating anti-Semitism has, in a sense, been tainted by partisan politics, especially in the U.S., that makes it hard to achieve, in a lot of issues, unity.
Right, 100%. I mean, on the one hand, as Halie said, this document is amazing, and it really is amazing. There are just certain parts of the document that, trouble some people, whether they are pro-Israel or Zionists. Just the fact that, presidents of France will come out and say anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is something we would expect an American president to say. Now, I want to add here, in parenthesis, that at the end of the day, the State Department actually does acknowledge the IRA definition. And this document is a strategy document that is not like a law. It's not something that is forcing, different bodies or parts of the U.S. To implement them. So in a way, I think putting in the nexus definition was a way to wink at, the progressives and say, okay, we put in a lot of things you're not going to be happy with. At least there's like a small little win over here. The question is, will this have some sort of a significance?
Right. Well, let's ask Halie about that. And also, to be fair, Halie, I should ask you how much you feel some of the criticism the plan has received is also driven by partisan political concerns.
I think that this is, again, an extraordinary strategy put forward at a critical time by an administration that is deeply committed to protecting and defending the Jewish community from this rising scourge of hate. JDCA heard from the vice president last week about the strategy. We heard about not only her deep commitment, but the White House's deep commitment to combating anti-Semitism. And that is evident in this unprecedented strategy. And if you want to talk politics, we can talk politics. The last administration had a president who believes he's going to be running for president again, Biden, who not only embraced, but echoed and even incited anti-Semites. So to go from that administration, a president who called neo-Nazis very fine people in Charlottesville, to now a president who is not only deeply committed to combating all forms of anti-Semitism and hate, but puts forward a strategy that we have never seen anything like it before. This is an extraordinary moment, and that is why the vast majority of Jewish Americans stand with this administration, stand with President Biden, and will be supporting him again in this next election.
And Michal, I wonder if some of the disagreement over the IRA definition, its application, reflects a division maybe about how many in Israel see the issue of anti-Semitism and how many in the North American Jewish community, especially its more liberal side, may define it.
So I want to make very, very clear, the most important thing that we have to keep in mind is to be able to identify and combat anti-Semitism. We must not fall into that pit, that rabbit hole of politicizing it. It's precisely what enables it to thrive and to flourish in every society. The strength of the IHRA definition, as I said, the result of a nearly 20-year democratic process in which experts from around the world sat around the table, that, as Zvika has said, has been adopted by over 1,000 entities, including 39 countries, universities, sports leagues, cities, and the list goes on, is that in order to be able to identify something, you must first define it clearly. And I would say the only thing that I'm very troubled by in the fact that neither Israel nor the word Zionism appears in a 60-page comprehensive policy is the fact that the way that the new anti-Semitism is presenting is precisely in that way, whether it's online, on the streets, or frankly, in Congress. It is Zionist or Zionism that is coding Jew. It is Zionist and Zionism that is able to, below the radar, actually present itself as political discourse while it's an integral piece of the majority of Jews. And by the way, even if it's just an integral part of the minority of Jews, they must too be protected.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there. Obviously, a discussion that will go on in the public sphere. Michal Kotler-Wunsch, Halie Soifer, and Zvika Klein of the Jerusalem Post. Thank you for joining us.